Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. The Pharmacy Leaders Podcast is a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network, with interviews and advice on building your professional network, brand, and a purposeful second income from students, residents, and innovative professionals.
Online dating is a big thing in New York. I heard of this thing called ghosting. If you don't know, ghosting apparently is if you're dating somebody online, instead of breaking up with them in person like an adult, you can just stop responding to all their texts and emails and disappear like a ghost. There's a new thing, they're calling it zombieing. Yeah, zombieing is when an ex gets back in touch with you after a long period of time. I made up my own thing. I call it mummying. Mummying is just when you try and preserve a relationship way after it's been dead. I like doing that joke because then I like to look at the couples in the audience. I'm like, somebody's getting mummied in here.
Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast. Today I have Mahesh Katagi, who's a pharmacist turned stand-up comedian. He's appeared on MTV in Season 3 of Fox's stand-up comedy show Laughs. He's also working on a pharmacy-based web series and a sitcom pilot. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at Mahesh Katagi, Maheshkotagi, and Facebook at Mahesh Katagi Comedy. Welcome to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it. How's everything going with you guys?
Pretty good. I want to first tell the listeners that you're in downtown by Wilshire in LA. So this is a quiet place in LA. That's about as quiet as it gets.
Yeah, sorry about it. Don't hate me, guys. Sorry about the audio is pretty loud.
Yeah, no, but excited to interview you. Everybody's always looking for, either whether a side hustle to find community or money, but something different than just being in the pharmacy all the time. So everyone's leadership road is a little bit different. Tell us a little bit about where you started with this and where you are today.
For sure, yeah. I think it's definitely important to have something else on the side in addition to the pharmacy, just during school especially, because you get so bogged down with the studying, working, rotations, all of that. And for me, I was always interested in doing comedy, and I had been writing all through college. And as soon as I got into pharmacy school, everything got so busy. I was like, well, I don't have time for this. I'll put it on the back burner for now. And, that passion never went away during studying. Like, my roommates and I would watch comedy specials just to kind of break up the monotony here and there, studying
Sure.
for all the exams. And then, so my P4 year, we were on rotations outside of Austin in Temple, Texas. I was at Scott and White, and I finally had some free time. And being in a small town there, I didn't really know too many people, and everyone that was there, all the doctors, the medical students, everyone was busy all the time. So I was like, well, maybe I'll give stand-up a shot. And I had written a bunch of jokes, which I thought were funny at the time. Went and did my first open mic in Austin. I bombed for about 3.5 minutes. It was terrible. I got one joke. I actually did some pharmacist jokes, which come to realize you can't really do pharmacy-related jokes to a crowd that isn't in pharmacy. They don't really get it.
Know your audience.
Yeah. But honestly, I fell in love with it. It was such a fun time, even though I was horrible at it. And I just kept doing it. It's about 7.5 years later now. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. Finished pharmacy school and went a different route. I did the Rutgers PharmD Fellowship Program out in New Jersey. Because I think part of it, I knew I wanted to do this. And, a lot of my friends that were in retail and hospital pharmacy, their schedules, it's insane. It's a tough schedule. And I was like, I want something a little more flexible. So I don't know what happened. I weaseled my way in, and I guess I said the right things on the interview, and I was really fortunate to get into the fellowship program and moved out to New Jersey and started commuting to New York pretty much every night of the week to do stand-up after work.
So you do this quite a bit. So I guess, and most people think of like stand-up or writing and things like that as something that you do for a couple hours on the weekend. Can you tell me a little bit more about how much time you actually spend doing this?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's one of those things where, some hobbies like guitar and things like that, you can play for like an hour at a time, hour a day, and you're by yourself and you can get really good really quickly. But with stand-up, it's one of those things I feel like it's 24/7. Like I have a bunch of different notepads, and even on my phone, like I notice something, I jot down something. Your mind's always kind of going in that direction where you're trying to think of material, and then it's like actually sitting down and writing it, and then watching stand up, going out into the world and like performing, connecting with other comedians is the biggest thing. So it actually takes a lot of time, and it's one of those art forms that to get good, you just have to be okay with being really bad for a year.
I remember seeing one of those comedy contests. I don't remember what it is. It was something to the effect of one of those ones where basically you get knocked out until there's one winner. And there was the guy who won, sure. And he kept writing in a notebook. And that you just mentioned a little bit earlier that you wrote jokes, but they weren't funny. So a joke is funny, but presenting a joke to a group of people is a different thing. Can you talk about the difference between nailing not just the joke, but the timing?
Absolutely. Yeah. The timing, I think, is the number one most difficult thing to learn. And I think that's why, the first couple of years, if anybody's listening, wants to get into stand-up, I definitely recommend it. It's just one of those things you just have to do over and over and over again until the timing becomes kind of inherent. And it's like a joke could be like amazing on paper, but if you just don't have the right pauses and you just don't hit the words at the right time, it loses all meaning. And people can either see the joke coming or they just don't believe the whatever the meaning is behind it. Mm-hmm. And you just lose the audience immediately. And so timing is just really difficult. Is one of the harder things. And even sometimes just figuring out how to write a joke, that takes a lot of practice too. Because at first I was like, oh, this is a good joke. And it wasn't, it's just, there's a structure in and of itself that it's really hard to just kind of learn and get that down. But it's just one of those things, the more you get on stage, the more comfortable you're going to get in front of the audience. And it's one of those things because people hate public speaking. And it's so different because it's not only just public speaking, but now it's also you're trying to make them feel an emotion that you felt when you wrote the joke, which is, it's crazy. But when it works, it's really one of the best feelings out there, I think.
Yeah, because I saw you've got a couple of videos on YouTube, and every time you told the same joke, it got laughs. And
yeah,
but I feel like we're seeing like the best. Like, how people take pictures and post them on Instagram, and that's like a happy time, but they don't talk about the time where in the morning where things were just a freaking mess and they wanted a divorce and they hated each other. You just see this picture of greatness or whatever. So maybe if somebody's interested in kind of getting out and doing something creative like this, what are some first steps? Like, what are the baby steps? Or is it just you got to suck it up and just take the punch in the face?
It's a little bit of both, but I guess for baby steps is just, I think the most helpful advice I've ever gotten from, in New York, you get to work alongside a lot of really good comedians. And I think the biggest advice I got was just be as honest as you can. And a lot of comedy comes from, like you said, like places of pain or stress or things that you just don't like. And because it has that raw emotion. And I think that's what people can relate to most, because nobody wants to see somebody go up on stage and be like, oh my God, like my life is so great. Like things are so easy. Yeah, like that's not fun.
Yeah, I want my money back.
Exactly. And I just feel like, I think that's one of the best things about comedy. And, we were able to do a lot of stuff. And, as pharmacists, we're able to see patients and touch patients' lives and things like that and really make a big difference, especially pharmacists in retail. You're getting to see the patients after they've left the doctor's office and really have those conversations that the doctors don't have time to have. And I think with stand-up, you're also having conversations with people that they necessarily wouldn't be having, even with close people. And it's part of it is when they hear that, oh, this person's going through that too. They just have such a way to relate. And I think no matter what people are going through, like for a few minutes while you're up on stage, people forget like their problems, and everyone's just together as human beings and just having a good time.
Well, let's talk about that. And I think we'll use Patch Adams as the common frame of reference, where you've got a health professional that comes in, makes people feel better by laughing, but then the establishment beats him down. So let's talk about those two sides. So I think you talked a little bit about how does laughter, how does having these good feelings make someone or improve healthcare outcomes, do you think?
It's been a little while since I've read my my textbooks.
Your Coda Kimball and your
yeah.
Okay, well let's not
you
go.
might have to help me in. But I think part of it is just with like the serotonin and things like that, where you're getting the same releases. And there's been a bunch of studies I think that have been done of just patients that have more positive outlooks tend to do better, kind of like almost like a placebo effect, I feel like. And I think that kind of plays in. I think the happier you feel and the less you're focused in on like one specific thing, the more maybe your just body gets a chance to just start getting better. I'm not sure. I know I don't sound like a pharmacist.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Well, I just talked last week with Rajiv Kurapati, who's a physician. He wrote a book called Unbound Intelligence in the Physician, and then Physician, How Science Transformed the Art of Medicine. And one thing that he talked about was how they kept answering questions in terms of therapy and things like that, but the patient asked, "Why me?" And that was a question that they couldn't answer. So I guess what I'm asking you is, so the patient's tired of hearing over and over again, "Yeah, I get it. Okay, things are bad. Just give me a break from all this stuff." It's like you're listening to a nonfiction book and you want a fiction. You're in pharmacy school and you just want a break from it. So it sounds like you're providing that kind of break. But tell me a little bit about the struggles that you have in terms of the establishment. When you go to a pharmacy conference, you're allowed to have like one joke at the beginning, but then it's all PowerPoints and business. So, so how do you think we could maybe put a little more laughter and a little more humanity into the process rather than just, well, let's go back to your A1C, okay? Let's just get back there.
Sure. Yeah, I think part of that I can just answer in the same way is for both of those questions is trying to connect with the people as much as possible. So whether that be like on stage where it's not you saying, "Okay, yeah, I get it. Like, let's go on to the next thing." It's like, "Hey, I get it, but I've also been through this." I think that's one of the most powerful things in comedy when you're talking about something where, you had like a bad day or you missed the train and you were late to work and your boss yelled at you for half an hour.
Yeah.
It's the universal things that everybody's like, "Oh man, that guy gets it. Like that happened to me yesterday." That makes for the best material. And I think with these pharmacy conferences or even seeing patients, I think sometimes we got to remember like, the patient we're seeing is, somebody's mother or father or brother or sister or best friend. And everybody has those feelings, and everybody, I think at the core of it, everybody, I think humans are more of a that pack mentality where like they want to be around other people and they want to feel accepted. And I think if there's just small ways of working that in where maybe it's just like a, "Hey, how's it going?" or just connecting on a very small level, I think people would really appreciate that.
Okay.
And I think it would help out. Yeah.
Well, we just saw Pauly Shore about 2 or 3 months ago, just completely randomly. It was our wedding anniversary. We walked past the comedy club. It's like, "Oh my God, there's Pauly Shore." And then my wife was born in the 80s and I was born in the 70s. She's like, "Who's that?" So
that's fun.
So tell me, what I wanted to kind of get into is a little bit about name recognition. Many pharmacists are trying to build brands. Obviously, as a comedian, when the intro act comes, you like hear a name and you forget the name, and then you hear another name and you hear it. But then you're like, "Oh," and then there's Pauly Shore. So how do you build that name recognition? How do you build a brand in a place where there are so many celebrities or so many big names?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's funny. I think more people have forgotten my name than people have remembered. But I think it's to focus on those few people that do remember your name and then build your audience and build your fan base through that, because I think nowadays too, whether it be you're starting like your own pharmacy or you're, trying to be a comedian or actor, social media comes into a lot of into play a lot more than I think it used to, like 10, 20 years ago. Obviously there was a lot of stuff wasn't even around, but like social media presence is big these days. But I think at the end of the day, I read that I think it's Malcolm Gladwell book. It wasn't Outliers. It was the other one.
What the Dog Saw or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that one. It was like he talks about how one of the best ways that ideas. Maybe it wasn't even him. I know like 2 or 3 authors. I'm just throwing hoping that that's the right author. But it was about how ideas are spread, and like I think one of the biggest ways that brands spread and like people's like, oh, those are cool shoes. It's like word of mouth is like one of the biggest things. So if you can really impact out of like, some of these shows, like, out of like 100 people, you might get 2 people that come and talk to you afterwards. And sure, that's not like a lot of people, but if those 2 people you can make a genuine connection with and they really like you, they might go and tell 1 or 2 other of their friends, be like, hey, I saw this guy who's pretty funny. And I think even with all this technology, I think word of mouth still makes the biggest impact on getting your name out there, where it be for a comedian or for a brand or a company.
Okay, well, let's talk product. I was just in Nashville, and I talked to Matt Marinchik, who is a Nashville music singer. He's been there for about 6 years, and those guys always have like a CD. They sell them for $10. Do you only get paid for comedy? Like here, you've got a booking. Do you have products? Do you have videos, downloads, anything like that?
So I have. I'm starting to think about doing some merchandise. But the thing is, I think with me so far right now, I've just been focusing on the bookings and trying to get my name out that way. I'm going to be recording an album like I think we're shooting for December, just like a comedy album, and getting it on Spotify and things like that.
Cool.
Which helps with getting more bookings. But as far as actual merchandise, I don't have anything yet. I was thinking about maybe doing some T-shirts with like a funny saying or something, but I think sometimes it's just kind of hard, like, to get out there and do that. And I feel weird about doing
it. Buy my T-shirt. Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
But I think the album will be a good way to get out there.
No, we'll definitely have to have you back for the release.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to.
But tell me about representation. So pharmacists, especially if they're going into creatives, getting representation, getting an agent. You have agents on both coasts for different things. Can you explain that process?
Yes, I can. And it's a doozy.
No, I know. That's why I'm so excited to hear from an expert.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'm an expert on anything, but I'll tell you the mistakes I've made and how I kind of got some success out of it.
That's funny. Tell me the mistakes you've made. Like that's going to be Go ahead.
Well, I think one of the biggest things is once you get in, it's I think it's that saying is true. What you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know, I guess. And It's like one of those things is like, I had no idea how difficult it was to get, like, not even just get an agent or manager and like how to even go about doing that. Like for me, I just got, so my manager, I'm working with this company, this management company in New York, Raja Paul. They're a small boutique management company. They're awesome. They're really nice people. I got them randomly. So, I thought you go out on stage, you do a show, and then, somebody comes up to me and you get signed, and you're like set like a month in, which actually happens to some people. But for the majority,
not you.
Yeah, not me. No, it did not happen to me. The majority of people, it just takes years of. You actually have to. The funny thing is, you have to have a manager to get auditions for stuff and to get booked at things like that. But management companies won't see you unless you have bookings and you already have like TV credits.
A publisher doesn't want to see you unless you've had a published book. But
Exactly.
You can't publish a book until you get through the publisher. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. It's like getting into like pharmaceutical industry. It's like, well, they want 5 years of experience to get this entry level position, but you can't get the experience.
Yeah.
So it took me about 6.5 years is when I finally got my manager. And it was one of these things, I had been doing stand up for a while. I got onto that Fox show, and the taping was in New Jersey at the Stress Factory. And some of the other comics on on the show had their management come out. And so that's like the thing. I was like, okay, I know there's agents and people out here, so I got to really do a good job. And I had a great set, and I finished, and nobody came and talked to me. And I was like, oh, well, that kind of sucks. All right, well, to square one. And I walked to the New Brunswick train station, and I was kind of a little bit down. I was like, I was really hoping that something would work out finally after like 6.5 years. And I'm just standing there, and this one guy's like, hey, you just did the show, right? He's like, oh, you're funny. I was like, oh, thanks. He's like, well, I'm an assistant at this management company, and we were here watching some of the acts, and we liked you. Why don't you come meet with us tomorrow? And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And yeah, I met with them.
That's the secret, right? That movie, The Secret. You just say what you want, and then 5 minutes later, it happens.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I want both of us to have $1 million by the end of this podcast.
Sweet.
So yeah, and then the funny thing is that, so I got the meeting with them, and it was just like a general meeting. But then when you get these meetings, they ask you what you've done or what scripts you've written or what you have. So you have to have a portfolio ready to go at a moment's notice. So luckily, I had that TV appearance, and I had done a commercial before, and I had written 3 scripts and like a feature script. And so I had like a bunch of stuff ready to go. And so then it was like, okay, well, it's kind of like one of those things where they want to make sure you're capable of doing all the work on your own, and also that you're somebody that they can, get behind, that somebody that's a hard worker. I think those are the things they look for. And so that worked out, and I started working with them, and then they actually put me in touch with this commercial agent who sends me out for TV commercials and things like that, out on the West Coast. So,
and that's your LA representation.
Yes,
they already
LA
knew
representation.
Them. Okay, so you didn't have to go by the train station in LA's sketch.
No.
I would never want to go down to the underground.
Yeah, I got lost one time. That's another story.
Okay. But tell me a little bit about what your expectations are for them. So I was just at a writers conference down in Tampa, and it's always weird to hear this, but I hear it over and over again where someone's agent's up there and saying, yeah, when you get on something like a podcast or something like that, make sure to tell us. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why is the PR company asking the author to tell them to tell? I was like, isn't the PR company supposed to be booking this and getting all this? So it's a little bit upside down to someone who's maybe not familiar. Could you familiarize us with the actual process?
Yeah, definitely. Sure, yeah. I think part of it is some of these bigger companies, they're not managing one person. They've got like 20 or 30 other people on their roster that are at different levels of their career, that have total different things going on. And I think part of it is you have to kind of always be in their ear. I'm like, hey, nope, don't forget about me. I've got some stuff I've got working on. And that was one of the people I was talking to here, one of the producers I met out here. We were working on a script together, and he was like, hey, just FYI, like some advice. He's like, don't be annoying, but definitely make sure people remember you. Because he's like, and just the entertainment, the way it is you just talk to so many people, and they're always have meetings. And for them, if you don't reach out to them for a month, they might just be like, oh yeah, I forgot that person was here. So it's kind of that keeping in touch, and also kind of letting them know it's like, hey, I'm also working on X, Y, and Z, because I think a lot of people get a manager and they're just like, oh, sweet, my job is done. I'm going to be famous now. They're going to do everything for me. It's like, no. You still have to keep doing everything you're doing. And they just help you get to a different level with that. Like they make other introductions, but if you're not out there, hitting the pavement, writing and performing and, doing all this other stuff, they have nothing to represent, I guess.
No, I get what you're saying. So, and we're kind of going deep into the weeds. Like most people are going to be like, I just wanted to know how to start my comedy career. But no, I'm being selfish and just asking for myself because I'm a writer and so, you're at certain levels. And when I started talking to these people, I was like, oh yeah, and definitely tell me when you're on. It's like, what are you talking about? Why am I telling you? And it's like, well, but you got to remind me you exist. All right. Well, I just wanted to make sure. Okay. Thanks.
For sure.
Okay. Well,
and I think that actually works for the work world too. I think sometimes is you just got to put yourself out there and tell people it's like, hey, I've done this, this, and this. Like, I think I'm ready for the next opportunity. So I think that's definitely a valid question for the podcast too, just in general. Like, I think it's good information for people regardless of what they're doing.
Okay, well, I've asked you a lot of questions. Is there anything that you want to say that I maybe haven't touched on?
I think if anybody's interested in starting, I think the biggest thing is, because, sometimes people are like, oh, like, I want to do stand-up. Like, I don't think I'm funny, but I would love to. I was like, you don't know you're not until you get out there. And I always recommend just go to find an open mic. It's going to be, I'm not going to tell you it's going to be good. I'm not going to lie. It's probably not going to be the best thing. But it's just about getting out there. And the comedy community is pretty supportive for the most part. So, and even audiences, if they know somebody's on there the first time, it's not as bad as people say. It's bad. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's pretty bad, but it's not that bad.
You're making sure that the competition is not coming. It's like, what? I was going to get into comedy, but I heard Mahesh, and I'm like, no way, man.
Definitely don't do no. I think just get out there and try and open mic. You got nothing to lose. I mean, it's literally 3 minutes out of your life, and if it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. But at least you've tried it, and you can say, hey, I gave it a shot, and maybe it worked out great, or maybe it wasn't for me, but I think the best thing is just to give it a shot. I think everyone has their own unique stories and something unique to bring to the table, and that's why I think comedy is so great, because you can be totally yourself, and there's room for you there.
Okay, if somebody wanted to see you online or in person, what are the best ways for them to get a hold of you or to see where your bookings are?
Yeah, definitely. So my website is just Mahesh Kotagi, MAHESHKOTAGI.com. I have that updated with all the shows and everything I have going on regularly. I figured out how to use Squarespace. I'm not trying to brag here, but it only took me 6 months to figure it out.
Nice
Something
work.
that should have taken 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then all my social media is on there. I'm like Twitter, my Instagram. I try and post, funny videos, stupid videos, things like that on there. But yeah, everything's up there, or my Facebook page. It's Mahesh Kotagi Comedy. They can find all my information on there, and I'll be linking to this podcast on all of those platforms.
Sweet.
So. And I will be telling my managers that I did this podcast today. So.
Okay. I've been working, man. I've been working.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, Mahesh, thanks for being on the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast.
Hey, I appreciate it. And yeah, anybody, if you guys got questions, just at me on Twitter or, send me a message. I respond. I'm trying to keep my response rate on my Facebook fan page to 100%, so I will respond to your messages. So.
That pharmacy school thing never leaves us, does it? Right? It's like, no. I have to have 100. I have to have 100 on my Facebook response rate, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right,
I'm like,
cool.
shit, what are people going to think? It's like, this guy's not doing anything.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks again.
I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. Have a good one, and I will talk to you later.
Support for this episode comes from Goodnight Pharmacology, 350 brand and generic name drugs with classifications, a leading resource for students in the United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. Print, ebook, and audiobook available on Audible, iTunes, and Amazon.com. Thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Leaders Podcast with your host, Tony Guerra. Be sure to share the show with the hashtag #PharmacyLeaders.